Without further ado, the great Rabbi Moshe Walter, welcome to the Motivation Congregation podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a schus. I'm very excited to talk with you.
So what I know about you, just to introduce you to the audience, I looked into you for a little bit to figure out if everything is what they say about you is true. I found in Reb Aaron Lopinski's introduction that he says that Rabbi Walter himself is a paradigm of Mentsch, and most appropriate that he brings the Torah to the public's attention. And I know also that you're fluent in a lot of Shas and Poskim. If you don't mind me asking where you attended yeshiva when you were younger, I find it interesting.
Sure. So, multifaceted background. I went to pretty standard high school. I went to MTA. That's where my career began. I attended Yeshiva Rakotel after high school. I then found myself in YU for several years. And after that, I went to the Mir Yeshiva in Yerushalayim, where I spent many, many years. We lived in Yerushalayim for close to 10 years. I learned primarily in the Mir's Kollel in Yerushalayim, but I also was in many other Kollelim in Yerushalayim as well during my time there.
Wow. So who did you learn under in Eretz Yisrael, if you don't mind me? Who was the rabbi?
So most of my time, truth is really from a very young age, I had an affinity for halacha. And learning Alib de Hilchasa. So even in Beis Medrash, whatever Masechta I was learning, I always found myself learning Rambams and Shulchan Aruch and Tur Beis Yosef. So I always had a strong affinity trying to understand how exactly Psak Halacha worked and what emerged from the sugyos and organizing the sugyos in that fashion. So really my entire tenure in Kol and Yerushalayim for about 10 years was very much focused on halacha, learning halacha. So I was in many different halacha chaburas throughout my time, in the Mir Yeshiva, outside the Mir Yeshiva, starting at Kol, also in Yerushalayim. So the primary amount of time was really in many, many halacha chaburas, but I spent a lot of time with Gedolei Rabbanim, Gedolei Apostle in Yerushalayim. I was very much influenced by Ramatzio Deitch, the Rav Ramat Shlomo, spent time with Rabbi Yisrael Gans, and some other Rav Chaim Kirschbaum, Rabbi Leichter. I was able, Baruch Hashem, to shamish many great people, and learning with many great people. So that was a lot of my time was spent in that area.
Wow. I know also that you were neighbors with the Folds. Big shout out to them. Because Rabbi Fold, right? He's one of the secret tzaddikim, right?
Very good. Yeah, regards.
So you are a Mechaber Sfarim. You author great Jewish literature. I've only recently come across your books when in this making of a Mentsch, and this came to my attention, but I would like to ask you to talk about, this is not your first book. How many books have you authored? How did you get into writing Sefarim, and what are they normally about?
It's a good question. The answer is I never intended to write Sefarim. They just sort of developed organically. I'm not sure if I was a good writer or not a good writer when I was younger. I liked reading and I enjoy writing, but I never consider myself a particularly focused writer. What happened is actually interesting. Sort of like any journey. This was totally unplanned and unprepared. Just like my plan of being in Eretz Yisrael for about 10 years was unplanned. This is similar. This was not a journey that I sat down to be an author, to write books. That was out of the picture. That was nothing that I ever considered. But as I mentioned before, I always liked organizing, putting things together, and writing things up. So any of my learning, I have notes on a good portion of what I was learning, and they were always very organized, worked through. What happened is that I guess somewhere toward the end of my tenure in Eretz Yisrael, I started writing a lot of Klalei Hora and Piskei Halacha, or just organizing how exactly the methodology of halacha works, the history, understanding how the Beis Yosef worked, where the Beis Yosef was influenced from, going through a lot of the Hagdamas of the Gedolei Rishonim, Gedolei Aposkim, and sort of found that I had a very good, pretty decent understanding of how the Rambam, how the Shulchan Aruch, the Torah, the Beis Yosef, the Levush, the Ramah, were trying to organize their codes of Jewish law. And as I organized and as I spoke to people and I gave shurim, I saw that this was something that was fascinating to people. It was fascinating to Kol guys who were learning halacha, who really didn't understand exactly how the system worked. It was fascinating to Rabbanim, to Poskim, and to really beginners trying to understand and to appreciate how the halachic process works. And before I knew it, I collected, hundreds and hundreds of pages of yisodos in the halachic process. And before I knew it, it really was something that was prepared to be a sefer. And I was a young guy, nobody knew me, and I tried peddling the work. I actually wrote everything.
How old were you?
hand.
How old were you? How old were you when this happened?
I was probably 32 or so, 32 and change. And I really... like I said, I wrote everything by hand. I didn't have a computer. I did not know how to type. Everything was written by hand. So if I lost it, it's gone. Like many Sfarim were lost over the Doros. The Yad Yehuda there was lost. Many Sfarim were lost, burnt in fires and like. So I held them like they were gold. And I had this manuscript of papers. And I was peddling it to see if anybody would be interested in publishing it. So when I was in the Mir, I hired somebody to type all of my work. I found somebody to type all my work, and it was all organized. And, like a young guy trying to find somebody to be interested in publishing this was not so easy. So I went to all the classical, well-known publishers, and they were totally uninterested. They didn't think this was a sale. They want to make money, and they didn't think this would be a moneymaker. And beyond that, they didn't think the topic was something that was shavuos called. They didn't think this was something that would interest women, children, and would be comfortable Shabbos afternoon bedtime reading. So I get a lot of no's, no after no after no after no, until one publisher saw that they felt that this could be something of interest. And Baruch Hashem, I brokered a deal with a publisher called Menucha. And they showed interest in the Sefer, and we worked together to put it into book form. And Baruch Hashem, it was extremely successful. The first printing sold out. We reprinted it again, and that sold out. And now I'm very proud that we brought it to Feldheim, and now Feldheim just republished it and printed it again. So after a lot of hard work and unpreparedness, that's how the first Sefer developed.
I mean, this is officially a motivation podcast. I love that story because of like the idea of it. Just everything came together, and people gave you no's at the beginning. That is so. It's almost hard to understand now that nobody was interested. Back then in the first book, it was about what problem did you solve by publishing that book? What was the goal?
So certainly the goal was clarifying for people, and there is a lot of unclarity there, how Psak works. Where did the Shulchan Aruch get his Torah from? And there are a lot of, if you'll see the Sefer, the Shulchan Aruch himself had an enormous amount of challenges to the Shulchan Aruch. Many people, many Gedolei Yisrael, felt that the Shulchan Aruch was not a Sefer that should be used, just like the Rambam Sefer, people who challenged, Gedolei Yisrael challenged. So everybody, if you're talking about motivation, Gedolei Yisrael were challenged throughout the Doros, including their Sfarim. So the Shulchan Aruch was not a Sefer that was niskabel right away. The Beis Yosef was a chiddush, what the Beis Yosef did, collecting the shittas of the Rambam, the Rif, and the Rush. The Rambam was an enormous chiddush, what the Rambam did. This was never the goal in Klal Yisrael. Torah Sheba'al Peh meant Torah Sheba'al Peh, that it's supposed to be oral law. It wasn't meant to be written down. Of course, the Mishnayos and Chazal wrote the Talmud, and we organized and put it together because that was a necessity. But certainly this was never the intention that there should be an organized canon that everybody should be able to be accessing. So why is it? What is it? How does it work? What's the basis of the Psakim, the Mechaber, the Ramah? How could the Ramah argue on the Mechaber? And who is the Mechaber to decide Psak Halacha? And how could the Mechaber often argue on the Rambam? Does the Mechaber argue on the Rambam? When does the Rambam and how does the Rambam paskin? How does the Kesef Mishnah work in the Lechem Mishnah and the Magid Mishnah? And really organizing this and explaining clearly the synergy between the Sfarim and the history of the Sfarim and how exactly that developed is something that we try to do. And Baruch Hashem, it's something that, as I noted, people who are not involved at all and interested really altogether in halacha and Jewish law are able to understand that there is a rhyme and reason, there's a method to the madness. And those who are learning halacha can also appreciate exactly how it is that we organize Psak Halacha, how Rabbanim are able to work with Piskei Halacha, how to weigh different Sfarim, how to understand what's a halacha, what's a minhag, what's a chumrah, what's ikar adin, what does it mean that a Baal Nefesh is machmir, when can you be mekel, should you be mekel, and the gamut of different background, the underpinnings of halacha is something that is very much focused on in the Sefer.
it takes it from just a yellow book, a phone book of just laws, and gives it depth. So you're the rabbi guy. You're the posek. You're somebody that's mastered this. But that's not why we called you in today. We called you in today because you have written 3 books, and the first 2 books that you wrote, correct me if I'm wrong, are about halacha and how all that goes down. Right, the making of a
halachic decision.
The second one's called the making of a minhag, which also fascinates me. I don't know how minhagim come to be made, but if you're the halacha guy, how is it and why is it that you came all of a sudden to kind of switch towards a different thing, which is the making of a mensch? That's middos. Middos ain't halacha. So how did you come into that?
That's a great question. I appreciate that question. It's a very important question. The answer actually is exactly the same way. And what people don't appreciate enough is that the same way there's halacha for ben adam l'makom, there's also halacha for ben adam l'chavera. And the same rigor and the same lumdus and the same sugyas and the same way that Gedolei Poskim and Gedolei Achronim and Rishonim analyze a sugya, whether it's in Hilchos Shabbos, whether it's in Erevin, whether it's in Yevamos or any of the Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, Bava Basra, the same thing is true ben adam l'chavera. And the goal of the Sefer, the Making the Mentsch, Hilchos ben adam l'chavero, is really to show that the same analysis, the same Abaye and Rava and Bava Metzia, is also the same Abaye and Rava in any sugya in ben adam l'chavero. You know, Shavuos is coming, so you have 5 dibros ben adam l'makom, you have 5 dibros ben adam l'chavero. They're the same thing. And very often people have a sense that ben adam l'chavero is just like for the nice guys. And it's not really important. It's not a stress. And we're often very hyper-focused on ben adam l'chavero.
The added counters.
But we should be. We should be focused on ben adam l'chavero. And we need to try to develop the same sensitivities and the same approach and understanding for ben adam l'chavera as we do ben adam l'makom. And the truth is, if you go back through generations, the challenge is that there's no sif and siman for ben adam l'chavera. If you go through Dal Chalkei Shulchan Aruch, so you could find very clear places where the halacha exists, whether it's Gittin and Kiddushin, it's an Even Ezer, whether you're looking in Choshen Mishpat for all forms of interpersonal areas of halacha. But there's no specific place to look for the halachas ben adam l'chavera. So there were Gedolei Achorim who authored such Sram. There's a sefer called the Mitzvos Halavavos. He was a Rav who lived in the vicinity of Brisker. Reb Chaim Brisker gave him haskama. There's a sefer called Shulchan Aruch Middos, Orach Meisharim. So Gedolei Poskim did write Svarim on ben adam l'chavera because there was the understanding that this is an area that needs chizuk, that's an area that needs focus and attention. And I felt that people need to understand much better that the same analysis and halacha and lumdus also exists in the area of ben adam l'chavera, and the same way we analyze any sugi in Shas, that also is true when it comes to ben adam l'chavera. So one of the goals of the Svarim is to show people that any question, any issue, ben adam l'chavero, needs to be analyzed, needs to be focused on, shaylas need to be asked. And that's really what the Sefer comes to do. The same way that there's a very, very clear approach and focus and stress in ben adam l'makom. If you're learning Hilchos Shabbos, if you're learning, like I said, Hilchos Erevin, or anything that you're learning, the poskim also address these areas of halacha identically, and we just need to know how to learn them.
I don't necessarily find that halacha applies to loving thy neighbor as thyself. How is it possible to codify, give an exact parameters of loving your neighbor as thyself?
I hope you're enjoying this episode. I want to let you know about a couple different podcasts from the Motivation Congregation Podcast Network. There's the podcast of the Motivation Congregation, which is a daily Musar idea. You get to wake up on a highlight with Musar from Rav Dessler, Rav Yerucham Levovitz. It's fun. We talk about self-improvement. Sometimes it can be harsh. Sometimes it's more light. But it's an enjoyable podcast. Perhaps you will enjoy it. You're listening to it right now. So just smash that subscribe button to get new episodes. And there's also the weekly Parsha podcast, an in-depth look at the Parsha. Normally it develops one single idea, attempting to string together multiple sources to have a crescendo of one practical piece of advice from the Gedolei Olam. And there's also, lastly, a story podcast. It's Motzei Shabbos that it is released. It's called Great Jewish Stories of Iconic Torah Giants. So check out all 3 podcasts. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button. And if you want even more content, definitely join the community on WhatsApp, 757-679-4497. Just text, add me, text subscribe, join us. It's fun, it's enjoyable, some good content, and Im Yirtzeh Hashem, we should continue to learn together. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
So you're going to have to read the chapter in the book about that. But the mitzvah of Avas Reim.
I did. I found there's a, right? Is there a machlokas Rambam and Ramban? I remember that.
The major machlokas Rishonim had to learn the Pashup Pshat in the Pasuk. Famous Ramban. And there's a sheet of the Rambam, there's a smak, and all the Monia mitzvos try to understand what the geder of that mitzvah is. What does it mean to love somebody? How do you fulfill that? What are you supposed to do? So the Rambam enumerates a way to do that. The Ramban enumerates a way to do that. But the same way that we try to uncover pshat in bor and in shein and in regel, you also have to understand, how am I able to fulfill a mitzvah d'oraisa of a haftal re'acha kamocha, the mitzvah avas re'im. So the poskim address that. The Rishonim address that. The Monei Mitzvos address that. The Achronim address that. There's a Marsha. There's Gemaras about this. There's 5 or 6 Gemaras in Shas where the pasuk v'haftal re'acha is brought, and you have to understand those Gemaras, learn those Gemaras, and understand what the Chazal are teaching us about the mitzvah v'haftal re'acha kamocha. Hillel, of course, told the ger who wanted to convert, "Man desani lechavech lo savid," whatever is hateful to you, you yourself should not do to others. So Hillel understood that was the most critical thing that any convert needs to know before coming tachas kanfei Shechina is the mitzvah of re'acha kamocha. So certainly we need to understand how to fill that. You're talking now in the time of Sirius Omer, Shalom Nagu Kavod Zebezeh, and the importance of Ish Echad, Belev Echad, and being Mekabel the Torah as an Am and as a nation and as a people. So the mitzvah after Re'acha Kamocha is a critical mitzvah. Now, if you want to know how to fulfill it, so it doesn't just mean say I love you, but you have to know how to fulfill that mitzvah. What is that mitzvah? Could be nicham avelim, hachnasas kala, mitzvah simchas chasam v'kala. The Rambam enumerates levayas hames are all bechlal the mitzvah after Re'acha Kamocha. Caring for somebody, looking out for somebody, escorting somebody out of your house, calling somebody, texting somebody, showing interest in somebody, feeling for somebody, listening to somebody, talking to a person. All of those are bechlal the mitzvah haftal re'acha kamocha. So yes, we need to know that that's a klal gadol b'Torah, but we also have to know how to apply that. And is it a mitzvah d'oraisa? Is it a mitzvah d'Rabbanan? When is it a mitzvah d'oraisa? When is it a mitzvah d'Rabbanan? You know, I'll tell you something which might interest you and your listeners. You know, I would say the majority of my day, maybe week or month, as a rabbi, is probably spent dealing with people and people's problems and adversity, family feuds, neighbors fighting, differences between parents and children, parents not talking to kids, kids not talking to parents. There are so many machloksim, whether it's community machloksim, whether it's family machloksim, whether it's differences of opinion, people not talking to each other. It's clear that what lies at the heart and a big focus of what we're seeing and what I'm dealing with is all in the world of Ben Adam L'Chavero. And therefore, there's no question that there needs to be a focus on how to treat others and how to care for others. And everybody has the right attitude. You know, when they sit in a din Torah, there are two sides. There are always two sides. How clear is it ever that A is right and B is wrong? I can tell you from significant experience sitting on Dinei Torah, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. It's rare, if ever, that it's so obvious that one person is 100% correct and the other person is not. So we're people. People are people. Life is life. And we bump heads and we have issues with each other, whether you're in yeshiva in the Beis Medrash, whether you're in a office setting, whether you're in a family setting, wherever you are, people express feelings, emotions. I shouldn't have said what I said. Maybe I should have said something instead of keeping quiet. Maybe I should have been more careful about doing something that I didn't do. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. There are so many interactions that we have throughout the course of the day. It's unbelievable how many times that I insult somebody, I didn't even realize I insulted somebody, or I could have helped somebody, I never helped somebody. So I think one of the ways where we could sort of strengthen ourselves is by recognizing that the Torah speaks to each and every single case. You know, if you want to follow halacha, so there's a code. We know how to do that. You want to learn Mishnah Berurah, Aruch HaShulchan, Chayei Adam, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the gamut of Svarim. So those make us better halachic Jews. Those make us better people because we're following halacha. We're doing what it is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, and we're very focused on making sure that we keep every prat ben adon l'makom. We don't want to make mistakes, and we're very cautious and careful with every area of halacha. So the way that we can become better Jews and care for each other more and better neighbors, better friends, better family members, better spouse, is if we understand what the halacha expects of us, ben adam l'chavero. And very often, if we're able to be machmir in these areas, sensitive in these areas, the same way that we're careful and cautious and meticulous in all areas of halacha, or Reb Chaim, Yoredeya, Even Ezer. You know, how many questions do I get in kashrus? How many questions do I receive in Reb Chaim? It's constant. Everybody's asking shilos ben adon l'makom. Everybody. I could ask you, how many questions do you think I get a week ben adon l'chavera? How many questions do you think Rabbanim are receiving ben adon l'chavera? So maybe around the Aseret Semei Tshuva there are more. Should I forgive this person? Why did this person forgive me? Do I have to go out of my way? But there's no question that there's not enough of a focus in this area.
Well, what role does it play? I apologize for interrupting, but I'm struggling to understand. Let's say I improve myself. I get better in my middos. I don't believe it's a mitzvah to have good middos. Let me have a poor conduct, poor ethics. Maybe my father will ask me to leave the table because I don't have the proper etiquette. But is it a mitzvah to have good middos? What role does that play?
So Reb Chaim Vital asks your question. Reb Chaim Vital, the outstanding disciple, the Talmud Mufak of the Arizal, asked this question. In Sefer Shnari Kedusha, he asked this question: why doesn't the Torah tell us? Why doesn't the Torah give us a mitzvah that every person, every human being should have good middos? That's his shaila. So you're mechavin to Reb Chaim Vital. That's a good question.
That's a really good question.
Yeah, mechavin to Reb Chaim Vital. So take a look in the Shnari Kedusha. He asked this question. Reb Chaim Vital's answer is that it's a prerequisite. You can't limit it to a mitzvah. It's a prerequisite to Kabbalah Satorah, is being a person who is a Bal Midos Tovos. You can't start, you can't get off the ground, you can't begin the process of Aseret Sedibros, of a Kabbalah Satorah. Ki Yishacha B'Leiv Echad is a prerequisite to Kabbalah Satorah. We need to be people who are giving, who are caring, who are sensitive, who are understanding, who are kind and considerate. And if you're not having those qualities and characteristic traits, the Torah doesn't even speak to you. The Gra says, the brother of the Gra, Rabbi Avram, the Ach HaGra, in a Sefer Malas Torah writes that just like grass grows because of rain, weeds also grow because of rain. And you can have very tall weeds. He says the same thing is true with Torah. If a person doesn't work on their middos, the Torah that they're learning is just growing weeds. The Torah grows, builds a person. But it depends. If you have splendid middos and if you have a refined character, then the grass will go and be lush and it'll be green. But if you don't refine those traits, then you're not building anything. You're just growing weeds as opposed to grass. So yes, it's a prerequisite. It's mandatory. It's a must. Not everything is writ large in Chazal, and not everything is explicit. The Rambam, by the way, answers your question. The Rambam says, yeah, it's all bechlal v'after recha kamocha. Middos are all bechlal tachas the mitzvah sasei diraisa, according to the Rambam, that it's a mitzvah sasei. There's all forms of middos tovos, of interpersonal behaviors, of interpersonal relationships, and mitzvahs ben elachar all fall tachas under the mitzvah of v'after recha kamocha. But yes, it is a must. It's a guarantee. It's mandatory. And we could talk about it. You see from Gedolei Israel that there was such a focus on these areas. Look, what do we say before Yom Kippur? You know, you can't receive tshuva ben adol l'makom if a person didn't rectify The relationship's been there's no tshuva. There's no tshuva. You can't ask a Kadosh Baruch Hu for tshuva on Yom Kippur for any avera if you don't take care of that between your friends. That doesn't work like that. So there are two channels and there are two highways that have to be driven, and they should be working together.
Right. Wow. So correct me if I'm wrong. I recall that there's also a Vilna Gaon who writes in Mishlei that there's no point of life if we're not working on our middos. Does that ring a bell?
I don't know if it's specifically a Mishlei, but many Gedol Yisrael have made such comments that they say from Yisrael Salanter, it's easier to go through Shas than to have Shas go through you. Meaning, many people can get through Shas, but to allow Shas to affect you, to penetrate you, to change you, that's a much more difficult task. So therefore, we need to focus on it just like we focus on all areas.
So in this book titled The Making of a Mentsch that you authored, it is a very unique sefer because it does exactly this, where it shows us, of course, now we know that we need to have good middos and be a mensch, but now it shows that there are also halachos of how to be a mensch, of how to have good middos. The first thing that actually comes out from the sefer is I love the layout, like the fact that it's easy read. I don't have the longest attention span. So there's questions, the answers, the sources, and then the conclusion. I love that about it. The introduction, that you create all the intrigue and prove why people need to work on their middos. And I must mention the bibliography is also is great. That is one of the best. Just the way that you tell us who these rabbis are that you're quoting. It feels like there's a chunk of your making of a halacha, psak halacha coming through. So now I want to talk some blitz questions. I want to get into the nitty gritty, figure out a couple examples where my brain says, let's be a mensch, but now there are halachas and there are guidelines. And I'm going to come at you perhaps with a couple different scenarios as to what would be halachically mandated by the Torah in these unique situations, if that would be okay.
Please.
So let's talk about one of the first mitzvos that we find. God came to visit Abraham. God came to check up on the sick. We have a sick person. I believe the mitzvah is called Bikur Cholim. I believe it's a Mishnah, even it's stated. We say it perhaps daily. So the question that you address in this book, my friend is sick, God forbid, no one should know of it, but he has a contagious disease. Does the Almighty want me to walk in and be mevaker chola and check up on him, even though one slight cough and I may contract his contagious disease?
Yeah, this is a very prevalent question. It's not an academic question. This is a very real question. And of course, this is a balance between fulfilling a mitzvah, a very important mitzvah, mitzvah d'oraisa, like you said, and according to many poskim, certainly according to the Rambam, it's part of the mitzvah of ahavta l'reacha kamocha. We say it in the Mishnah in Peah, elu dvarim she'ein lehem shiur, v'hakeren v'kayemes l'olama ba Elohim bikur cholim. So bikur cholim is an extraordinary mitzvah, and the Gemara's Maseches Nedarim tell us maisim, great stories from Gedolei Tanoim Amoraim who fulfilled this mitzvah. And as you point out, Avram Avinu himself was mevaker chol, and the Gemara teaches us, and then the Masechah in the beginning of the first paragraph, Masechah Sota, that we are supposed to imitate HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was mevaker cholim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu visited Avram, so too we also have to be mevaker cholim. But what do you do in a situation where it could impact you negatively? It could affect you. So we do have a klal, chayecha kodmin, that I have to care about my life before somebody else's. If I'm safe and I'm okay, I don't necessarily have to put myself into harm's way to take care of somebody else, which in and of itself is a very important question, which I also address in the Sefer. How far does a person have to go? Do I have to put myself in danger to help somebody else? Is that required? Is that something that the Torah mandates? That's a separate chapter, and that's discussed in many, many different facets. But in this context, many poskim, most poskim, and it seems to be pretty clear, I don't have to visit somebody if they are sick and they will get me sick. I don't have to put myself in harm's way or in danger in order to visit somebody to be mevaker cholim. That's not necessary. That's not required. It is important to note that there are other ways to potentially fulfill the mitzvah bikur cholim, and this the Gedolei poskim talk about. Moshe has a tshuva about it. Whether you could fulfill the mitzvah bikur cholim over the phone, or with a letter, or today even through Zoom. or seeing somebody without actually contracting the contagious disease, and you might be able to fulfill that mitzvah. Whether or not you're actually fulfilling the mitzvah directly the same way, arguably you are. The Ramban actually writes in Paskin the Shulchan Aruch, the reason to actually visit the sick person is to see them. And when you see them, you'll feel their pain. And if you feel their pain when you see them, then you'll be able to daven for them more effectively. So a card, a letter, a phone call might not do that because you don't see them, you don't feel them, you don't see their sorrow, their pain, their suffering, their loneliness, their anguish, their physical, emotional, and spiritual pain. But maybe if it's a phone call, if it's a WhatsApp, if it's a Zoom, and you see them, so you could certainly make an argument that you could fulfill the mitzvah that way. There's no question being there live is critical and is important. But me'ikar hadin, one is not required to do so. The one caveat, and this is very important, this comes up a lot, if any of your listeners are doctors and nurses, so the poskim read, Tzitz Eliezer, Bavadia, others, that yes, if you're a healthcare professional, if you're a medical practitioner, so part of your job is to take that level of risk. And that means that it's your responsibility potentially to put yourself in danger. We're talking about ambulances, we're talking about paramedics, we're talking about first responders, we're talking about doctors, we're talking about nurses. All of these individuals have set up themselves for a career in a line of work that has a significant level of danger. So once they've signed up for that, they can't just walk away. And if there's somebody who is contagious or somebody is dangerous, so today we have ways that medical practitioners and professionals are able to take care of themselves and protect themselves as best we can, but they might not have the heter that a lay person has and say, you know what, I'll find a different way. Because if you're not going to care for the person, if you're not going to take care of the person, who's going to administer the drugs, who's going to administer all of the necessary requirements in order to get that person back to health? So there is a chiluk between medical practitioners and professionals and the average person.
That is fascinating. I love that there's clear guidelines as to what to do. It brings a certain amount of menucha, that there's the difference between a text and a FaceTime, and the difference between what your profession is if you're in healthcare. Another question I have, perhaps now is the right time to ask it, and you're the right person for the question to be posed to. It's a pet peeve of mine, and I think it's a misplaced pet peeve of mine because of some maybe lack of understanding of something. But I'm praying Pesukei de Zimra, I'm wrapped in my talis and tefillin, and I'm consistently being bombarded by the holy collectors that are searching for some help with their own cause, or maybe collecting for another cause. I'm familiar that there's two lo sa'ases to close your hand and close your heart in tzedakah, that we have to make sure to give tzedakah. And I'm assuming there's a positive mitzvah also to give tzedakah. I mean, you should always do justice and righteousness. Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha also. How do I proceed? What's the right outlook, halachically speaking? What does a mensch do? Do I stop my davening every sentence and give another dollar? Do I even need to give them? Do I need to give my family first, or God forbid, give somebody else something that needs something? How does a mensch go about this halachic kind of interesting scenario?
Yeah, it's an important question, and certainly tzedakah is one of the ways that make us the people that we are. And we're an extremely philanthropic people, and the amount of tzedakah that Klal Yisrael distributes is enormous. Our response time is unbelievable, but there are a lot of people asking, and I think we all know that, whether it's solicitations by mail, by email, by WhatsApp, by phone, in person. There's no end to the needs that exist, and very often they're very worthy needs and very serious needs. How and when does a person have to respond is a very, very complicated question. And it's a very difficult question, although, as you pointed out, there are answers and there are clear answers. There's still doubt in many things that we do. So yes, there is a lav. Torah tells us that you can't look the other way. You're prohibited if somebody's asking you for money to look the other way. So in your particular context, in shuls and davening and the like, so the truth is there are different ways that even shuls go about it. I know of shuls that they don't allow somebody to collect during Chazar Sashatz. They might not allow somebody to collect during Pesukei de Zimra, and they will say you need to wait till after davening. There is an approach. There is something to that. We do see that we have seen historically in Klal Yisrael that there were times when a appeal was made during davening. maybe by Kriyas Torah, before Kriyas Torah, at a time when there was mutter to be mafsik, and there are times that that's done immediately after davening. So if there's a minhag hamakom, if there is a established shul custom where an ani is permitted or prohibited to ask, then the answer is much better. And certainly that is the best thing to do. If shuls, batei medrash, batei knesses could set up established times and ways that a tzedakah collector, shliach and meshulach, is able to ask, that makes life much easier. If you're in Shemon Esrei and you keep on having somebody tap you, or during Pesukei de Zimra, you keep on hearing clunking of money, and there is a level of disturbance. But at the same time, people need. I've seen people do interesting things. There are people who leave money out, and a collector knows that, I could take that money. There are people who will respond. So I think a lot of it is very much dependent upon the person, upon your kavana, but you always have to balance, really, are you just so focused on your davening that you don't even able to see somebody else? Is an unbelievable maisa with a balatanya. The balatanya had a son or a grandson who the baby was crying in another room. Baby was crying, and nobody was paying attention. And there was an element of chasidus and tzidkus that nobody was able to pay attention to a baby crying because there was such focus on one's learning and one's hasmada. The Balatanya said that's a mistake. If you don't realize that there's a baby crying when you're learning, you're missing the whole point of your Talmud Torah. So there needs to be that balance and their honesty when there are people asking you for something, right? We know the Netziv actually writes, when you were discussing the mitzvah ben adam lechavero of Bikur Cholim, the Netziv says when HaKadosh Baruch Hu came to visit Avram Avinu when he was sick, he wasn't feeling, this is God visiting Avram Avinu when he was in a situation of tremendous pain. HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself came to visit him. Could you imagine that? And all of a sudden, Avram Avinu sees 3 people. They weren't tzaddikim, they weren't angels, they were malachim, but they didn't look like that. They looked like vagabonds, like waywards. They were Arabs who were walking without shoes. Avram Avinu tells HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Adonai, im namatzasi chen beinecha. Wait a minute, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I need to talk to these other people. Unbelievable. That means Avram Avinu stopped what he was doing. His dveikus with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, his espoidedus with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in order to take care of the aniyah, in order to take care of people who needed to be housed, in order to people that needed hospitality, people that needed
food. It's a pella. He put Hashem on hold.
So there you have it. That's the Netziv writes. The Netziv explains in Amek Davar, right on that pasuk, that there are times when you put that aside. There are B'liashiv Paskins, it's quoted in the Sefer Tefillah Kilchasa, that if a person has orchim, guests at his house that are just coming, and you need to set them up and give them what they need, there's a P'tur of Tefillah B'tzibur. How could you run out on them? How could you leave them? That's the Netziv Mamish. So B'liashiv says, if you're in such a situation where you're tending to the needs of your orchim, your guests, and you're just going to leave them stranded and invite them into your house and allow their baggage and belongings to stay and to sit, and you don't set them up and put them where they need to go, or give them what they need to eat, that's a bittul the mitzvah of achnasas orchim. So the raya to that is this Netziv and the Avram Avinu's behavior. So the same thing is true when it comes to tzedakah. A person has to be very honest. Very honest. There are times where hefsek is mutter, mipnei hakavod, mipnei hayira. So a person has to know this is a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to say the Iraisa. Could be it's a lav not to give the person. So how much you have to give them? $1, $5, $10, a penny, a nickel, a dime, a quarter. That's a separate question, which is addressed also in the Sefer. But you have to be able, and this is the Mechaber writes, the Rambam writes, part of the mitzvah of Nesina tzedakah is not just the money. It's not just writing the check, but it's besever panim yafos. It's giving the person the time of the day. It's giving the person their deserved honor. This is tzelem elokim that we're dealing with. And if you just look the other way and point and growl and don't act b'derech kavod, you're not fulfilling the mitzvah of tzedakah b'hidura. The Rambam writes that explicitly. It's paskin Shulchan Aruch Hilchos tzedakah. Part of the mitzvah is not just, as I described, the check, the swipe of the credit card, but it's saying, I understand, I get it, I feel your pain, I'm connecting to you. Yes, the tzedakah is the mitzvah, but there's another element of the mitzvah as well.
I'm bringing to mind now. In your book, you brought an incredible story about a man who was attacked with people constantly trying to raise money and asking for money, and he went to visit the Chavetz Chaim, and he heard the Chavetz Chaim talking about Ach Toiv V'Chesed Yerdefuni. that to be pursued by kindness is, so to speak, in perspective, it's better to be pursued by kindness than to be pursued by, God forbid, who knows what else.
Absolutely.
Something in the book, kind of, if I may say, just it was a game changer. It took me a little bit, and it bothered me a little bit. I don't actually like all that much having guests Friday night because of the fact that, well, I want to buy myself a nice bottle of wine, but if I have to buy two, it's like awkward only to buy one. So then I got to share it, but I can't necessarily, my Kolachek's not going to get two fancy bottles of Cabernet. And then also, like, I don't get to see my kids that much. I'm always at yeshiva. I just want to hang out with my family. But I go out of my way, like, every, come time to time and invite hachanasas orchim. I invite guests from down the block. I'll invite friends, family. In the book, you make some unique guidelines. You pointed out in the postgame that perhaps having my next door neighbor over for a Suda may not be a fulfillment of hachanasas orchim. Is that true?
Yeah, the poskim talk about what exactly the parameters of the mitzvah are. So if you're having people that are independently taken care of, that have a house, that are able to fend for themselves, is that really the mitzvah of hachanasas orchim? So if you're just getting together with people who you know because you enjoy that and they enjoy that, there's a strong argument to make. There's a Ma'aral's brother in the Sefer Chaim seems to indicate that hachanasas orchim means that you're going out of your way looking for somebody that absolutely needs the invitation. Maybe, according to the Ramah, it could be even inviting somebody dafka who's out of town and finding somebody who needs the hachanasas orchim. If somebody doesn't need it, so maybe that's not hachanasas orchim. It could be somebody's in a tough spot, in a difficult situation. Maybe the finances are tight. Maybe there's somebody had a bad week. Somebody needs the chizuk. So yeah, of course, maybe just having friends over is also b'chlal the mitzvah haftarech k'mocha. Maybe you're not fulfilling the mitzvah of hachanasas orchim. But there's no question that when we're inviting people that it's easy and that I don't have to think twice about, so that might not be an absolute fulfillment of the mitzvah. It's much easier to have those who you know, friends and family, and those who you're comfortable with, than those you're not comfortable with. The people who need it are the people who are alone. Almanos, Yisomim, the singles, those are people who will benefit much more, and the people that we need to be looking out for more. And I think that's a very, very important thing that we all need to be thinking about. Who are we inviting? How are we inviting? Am I thinking about somebody during the week and calling them saying, I'm thinking about you, love to have you over? Or if it was an afterthought, they just bump into someone and say, you want to come over? It's a whole different mentality in terms of how we do that. Now, yeah, of course, we should invite people who are enjoyable to be around and who our family appreciates. But those individuals who are bringing people who are harder to have, people who are more compromised, sometimes they're physically compromised, sometimes they're emotionally compromised, sometimes they're not the easiest guests, sometimes, they're people who are difficult to have. But that is the mitzvah hachanasas orchim on the highest level. That's what we see Avram did. Avram was looking for people, went out of his way to find people, and made sure that they weren't people who were taken care of. These are people who are completely lost. They're in the desert, and those are the people Avram Avinu invited into his house. Those are the people that we should be looking out for, not to the exclusion of neighbors, family, and friends, of course, because it could be if you're not inviting those people, they'll be insulted, they'll be hurt, and then you're aggrieving them. That might be a isra of ona. But yes, let's think about other people who have it harder. There's so many people who are lonely. There's so many people in every community, every town, from the big cities to the small cities, in town, out of town. All they want to do is to connect with somebody else. And that Shabbos invitation could keep them going for weeks when you're thought about before, and when you continue to think about that you were invited by this person, it gives a person enormous amount of strength. So I think that's a wonderful, wonderful area to be mechazek.
So now I have an opportunity to ask you a very controversial question, and you write about it in your book that it is controversial. I bet you know what I'm about to ask you. That now that I'm going to invite people that maybe I am not so close with and share my Cabernet, so what if I know that they're not going to make a bracha on it, meaning that they are not necessarily so stringent in their mitzvah observance? Maybe they aren't even religious. Or meaning, am I allowed to ask them to drive or come for the holiday? Am I allowed to enable the chesed or do hachanasas orchim if it might lead towards some other Jew maybe not keeping the laws of Shabbos or kashrus perfectly? What does halacha say in that situation?
It's a very, very controversial question, and the Gedolei Poskim contemporarily have addressed that. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, actually, Zatzal, addressed that specifically. He wrote a letter to the Anhala, to the leadership, to the administration of Or Sameach in Yerushalayim. They were asking the question whether or not it's permitted to invite the Mechalel Shabbos to their house on Shabbos when it was quite clear that those individuals would be driving to the home, driving to the house, or in a situation Shlomo Zalman Auerbach had when his yeshiva Kol Torah inaugurated its new building. So many of the benefactors and the philanthropists were not religious, secular Israelis. And the question that was raised from Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was whether or not they could provide them with refreshments, kibud kal, and a little bit of a suda when they know that they weren't wearing a yarmulke and they weren't going to make a bracha. Well, sisa Hashem lokech l'shav, and making a bracha levatal kavinisa d'iraisa, at least according to many Rishonim. And Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says that it's mutter, absolutely mutter. And the reason that he says it's mutter, because if you don't take care of them, you don't invite them for Shabbos, or you don't give them the food, they're going to disrespect you, and they're going to be very, very pained by your behavior. And that, says Reb Shlomo Zalman, is the Issa D'Iraisa that the Torah tells us, Lo sisnas achicha b'vavecha, they'll wind up hating you. So therefore, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says, better to give them something to eat, better to invite them over, because you're helping them, protect them, that they're not over a bigger lav, the Issa D'Iraisa of Lo sisnas achicha b'vavecha. So therefore, again, knowing how to weigh and to balance all of areas of the Targum mitzvos, this is what Gedolei Yisrael have taught us. Here, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says that, yes, it's true, they're not going to make a bracha, and that might be an Issa D'Iraisa. They might be Mechalel Shabbos, but nonetheless, you need to think about how they're going to react and respond and what the fallout's going to be. When it comes to inviting somebody for Shabbos, so Shlomo Zalman Auerbach famously was the posek who held that as long as you give the opportunity for them to stay, that would be enough. So therefore, if you invite them for Shabbos and you say, they have a place, we have a bedroom, it has to be sincere, it has to be real. You have to have the housing for them. You have to have the bed for them. If they decide that they're not interested in staying with you for the whole Shabbos, they're going to go home, that's their decision. But you've given a real bona fide opportunity to do so. There's no question that in Chutz La'aretz, that psak is pretty much the psak that's been iskabel, and there's no question that how many Yidden today, how many from Yidden are there that we had because of that psak, because they saw Shabbos Suda, because they had a very warm meal, a nice meal, they connected with the Torah family, and therefore, as a result, they had been influenced and positively influenced as a result. But indeed, at the same time, as you'll see in the Sefer, there are many who are very opposed to that. Moshe Feinstein Zatzal took a much stronger, harsher approach to that. He wrote a letter to Rabbi Kaplan, telling Rabbi Kaplan that they can never have people drive to a beginner's minyan on Shabbos. That would be inappropriate. That would be wrong. So therefore, there has to be a balance. And like all areas of halacha, if anybody's involved in the field of kiruv, you have to ask these questions. There has to be a system, a policy, and protocol, and understanding how you do this. It's not a hefker. It's not a free-for-all. Just because you're doing kiruv doesn't mean that, we could do whatever we want. And, the rules of Shulchan Aruch are just bypassed and they're voided and it doesn't exist anymore. There's a system, there's an approach, and this gets back really to the making of a halachic decision, knowing how to paskin in these complicated, compromised, tenuous situations where you could sort of pull the string from two ends, needs a posik mufak, needs somebody who has understanding and depth to appreciate ikar adin, chumrah, kula, what's an area to be more relaxed, where Torah tells us and where halacha tells us that we could be more, forgiving, if that's the right word to use.
Mm-hmm.
But these questions that are significant, that are serious, and also relate, as we noted, both to Ben Adol Chaver and Ben Adol Makom, and need serious attention.
Mm. Rabbi, you're brilliant, and it's not the slightest wonder why your books are selling so well. Such tact, finesse, in answering the questions and giving over the psak. I have endless questions, but I don't want to keep everybody from their bonfires. Maybe I could just do one more question, and then we can kind of conclude with our final thoughts. Would that be fair?
Please.
I drive like a crazy man sometimes because I have timelines where if I'm driving here in Lakewood, there's like 4 roads that all lead to the same places that everyone needs to go. And there's probably 100,000 Jews here. But since it's 1-lane highways, if one maybe mother with 8 kids is waiting to make the left and there's a backup down the whole highway, or it's supposed to be a highway, but it's a 1-lane street here in Lakewood. So it could get to me with my middos. So sometimes I will drive faster than not the speed limit because my father's listening, but within 5 of the speed limit. But I want to know in halacha, if I cut someone off in driving, honking, cutting somebody off, what should be my approach? What does the Torah and halacha say about driving in intense times, especially here in Lakewood?
That's a very real question. In one of the chapters, I talk about the status of a line in halacha. Does a line have any halachic teeth to it? And it's actually not so simple to find the makor in Chazal and Shas that a line plays significance. So maybe I could cut somebody off. The Torah and Chazal talk about scholarship, gender, in terms of priorities. So there's never such a thing.
Hayecha koidman. I come first. Hayecha koidman.
Very good. So Hayecha koidman, yes, but it depends who you are. We have a Kohen, we have a Levi, we have Yisrael, we have men, we have women. There are many different gradations in terms of levels in Klal Yisrael.
If I'm a Kohen, I can cut somebody off.
Not only that, you should, if you're not a Kohen, you should give the Kohen the opportunity to go first. That's the mitzvah asay d'oraisa v'kidashto. But cutting somebody off, arguably, the reason that would be a problem if you're driving, you want to cut somebody off, if you want to cut somebody in line in a supermarket in the light, that would be probably fall under the category of ona, that you're aggrieving somebody, you're paining somebody. Here's somebody's been waiting and has done nothing else but wait to be served, to be taken care of. And I'm simply coming and cutting you off. You've angered somebody. You have violated the lav, according to the Ramban, of Havas Reim. You're not loving your neighbor like you love yourself. You wouldn't want somebody to do that to you, so how could you do it to somebody else? So therefore, these are areas where a person has to really calculate their behavior. Like Chazal say, a person is tested, kiso kaso, a person is tested how they behave with their money, a person is tested how they hang with their honor. These are areas where a person is really tested. And when you get in your car and when you get online, that's when a person is really, really defined. And that's when a person really is judged. And that's when a person really knows what they're all about. I'll tell you something, when you read biographies of Gedolei Yisrael, so what do we take out of them? And a lot of what we take out is they're godless, they're genius, but there's something else. And this is the most important thing maybe that exists in all biographies. Gedolei Yisrael had impeccable middos. Impeccable middos. You read about Rabbi Yisrael Salanter and the Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, Reb Chaim Shmulevitz. These people, they had enormous depth of heart and incredible sensitivity. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter coined the phrase Gezel Shena, not stealing somebody's sleep, being careful when somebody's resting and sleeping, not to be loud, not to be noisy, not to trample over somebody. The Chafetz Chaim authored, the Shmiras HaLashon because people weren't behaving correctly. The Chafetz Chaim wrote the Sefer Avas Chesed because he wanted people to be able to be taking care of each other. Chaim Shmulevitz, before it was popular, in every WhatsApp you see somebody hugging a soldier. Chaim Shmulevitz, 1960s and 1970s, would see an Israeli soldier, would hug him, would cry, would daven for him because that's my brother. And Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, his middos, and his ability to act with integrity, titin emes liyakov, this is what makes us the nation we are. This makes us the people we are, that we have ancestors like this. We have people to look up to like this. And what makes a yid is Ashrei Misha Bala Kan Talmud Liyada. Take a look in Psachim and Daf Nun. Rabbeinu Chananel explains that to mean if you see a person acting with good middos, that means they're learning well. If you see a person who behaves properly, that means they have Talmudo biyado, because then the Torah penetrated them. Then the Torah has taught them how to behave. And the goal really of Talmud Torah is to be able to be a person who is elevated and to be a person who's closer to Kadosh Baruch Hu, but closer to each other. I've seen with my Rebbe, and I've seen with those who I feel a stronger closeness to, those who I look up to, are people who act appropriately. It's not attractive when you see somebody get angry and upset and who acts rough and gruff and doesn't. Who's attracted to such people? The people who are most attracted to are the people who are pleasant. Rav Chaim's godless, besides his godless b'Torah, was because he was a pleasant person. He was a person who acted with piety. Why were the Chofetz Chaim Svarim so niskabel? Because he was a person who imbued and embodied all of those behaviors and lived them. Tocho kibaro. The people we are so attracted to and who we so look up to are those people who are refined, who act appropriately, who act properly. And that's what Gedolei Yisrael were. So when you read biographies, look in the biographies, not just about the genius and the pure academic minds and the ability that Gedolei Yisrael had to understand text and appreciate them and to work hard and the lumdis and the hasmada. But how did Gedolei Yisrael behave to each other? How did they treat kittens and animals, tsar balei chayim? How did they treat people who were poor? How did they treat people who weren't as successful? How did they treat the average person on the street? That's the test. So the test is how you drive. The test is how you act in the supermarket. The test is how you behave in your dorm room. The test is how you behave in your house and your office when not people aren't looking. And that's when the geder of Ben Adam L'Chaver emerges, and that's when we know a person's real self and real sense. And this is what should motivate us, God willing. It's part of this motivation congregation, beautiful podcast you have and great work that you're doing, is that we should all be motivated, inspired to be working in a way we are bettering ourselves, we're climbing the ladder, like Reb Sajigon says, that he was a better person today than he was the day before. And part of life, like you pointed out from the Gra, and as we know the Gedolei Yisrael said, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter says this, and Chofetz Chaim makes this point, we have to be better, and we have to be more caring, more sensitive, more understanding, more nuanced in everything that we do. And that's what makes us the people we are. That's what makes us the nation that we are. By Shanim, Rachmanim, and Gomle Chasadim. That's what the Gemara tells us, that we are defined by those three characteristic traits. Are we caring? Are we kind? Are we philanthropic? Are we beneficial? Are we sensitive? Are we caring? Do we perform chesed? This is what makes us the nation. This is what makes us the people that we are. The learning Torah isn't just a pure academic achievement. And the goal is not just to learn Svarim and to go through Shas and to be better in the areas of Ben Adam L'Makom, but Ben Adam L'Chaveru has to be equated. Just like we said, the Dibros Ben Adam L'Makom, Ben Adam L'Chaveru are equivalent. They're 5 and 5. And Los Achmor is just as important as Shmir Shabbos, and Kibbut Aveim is just as important as Anochi Hashem Elokecha. That's what we have to be doing. That's what we have to be focused on. There has to be that balance and that nuance, and we can't have this focus in one area, not the other.
Those were some iconic couple minutes here on the podcast. That should be listened to on repeat. Those golden words that you just spoke there. Rabbi Walter, who is the biggest Mentsch that you know?
Now I'm really going to get in trouble. Now you're asking me the hardest question. I'll tell you something.
You don't, not excluding anyone else. Everyone could be a big Mentsch or honorable mention. I came up with that pun, honorable mentions. But who's the biggest Mentsch?
I'll tell you what I'm most inspired by. I'm most inspired by the people who ask me questions in Ben Adam L'Chaver. When I get a shaila about, did I do this properly? Or what should I do in this situation? I have that now, a particular few difficult situations that people are asking me about. But when a person is sensitive and understands that I need to figure out the right way to approach, whether it's a child, a parent, a friend, a relative, a neighbor, something happened, that to me is the definition of a Mentsch, is somebody who recognizes that I'm not just going to take care of this myself, or I'm not going to pretend that it didn't happen. What's the right way to behave? And it could be with a non-Jew. I have this very often. Did I behave properly to my housekeeper? Did I behave properly to my nanny? Should I do this? Should I not do that? I can't pay them on time. Do I have to pay them on time? There are so many people who are eager to do the right thing. And those people are asking those questions, kol hakavod to them. And we really, if anything emerges from this, it's that we should be more mindful and be more thoughtful and more sensitive in all of our behaviors and interactions with other people. And when there's something that is questionable, think about it and see, what does the halacha require of me? What am I supposed to do? Ask shaylas in all areas of halacha.
Rabbi, it's all I can tell the people is go and buy the book, because we're not going to have the time to go through all these questions. We got to wrap up because there's bonfires to get to. But I'm telling you, people, the other questions of it comes down to whether or not you can put a check mark next to the mitzvah of I went to a chasana to gladden the chassan and kala. If you do it right, then you did the mitzvah. But it's possible to attend a wedding and maybe and not fulfill the mitzvah. You got to find out the guidelines, ladies and gentlemen. All the ideas. I have questions that we're not going to be able to get to about war and this situation of hostages and wartime. There are these are unique scenarios that they're not exactly even new to the world of the Jewish world in post-Gib, the persecution. You reference, there's literature in your book that you go through clearly about at least what to ask about. What's a shaila? Organ donation. One of the most incredible chapters I have to tell, just to speak out. And the idea of it could be you say that I want to run advertisements of this interview that I thought was great, and I want people to click on it. So I'm going to run this ad on my friend's podcast because I'm going to steal all of his listeners so they'll listen to my podcast. That's a halacha shaila. Am I correct?
Absolutely. It's a very, very serious shaila.
So people buy the book, The Making of a Mentsch. Rabbi, if I may, any other books, Rabbi Walter, coming down the chute that we may know of? Any future writings?
Yeah, I'm actually working now. The Making of the Siddur, the history, origins, the development of nusach, and teaching people how to appreciate. I guess the difference in Baruch Shamar and Shemon Esrei. Everybody thinks whatever's in the Siddur is identical, and there's not so much knowledge amongst all of us who are davening 3 times a day about the tefillas that we're davening. Yigdal Adon Olam, Ashrei, V'Letzion, Shemon Esrei, Shema, Birch. What's the Raisa? What's the Rabbanan? How did this make it into the Siddur? Why is this not in the Siddur? Why do we focus on this? What can I skip? What can't I skip? The difference in Nusach Ashkenaz, Nusach Sfarad, Sfaradi. All of that is going to be addressed in Mirz Hashem, the making of the Siddur.
Oh, incredible. I thank you for your time, Rabbi Walter. I hope that people will not only buy The Making of a Mentsch, but if you want to know more about halacha and more about a minhag, I'm going to have to get you back on the podcast, Rabbi.
Looking forward. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for helping us learn what it means to be a Mentsch and prepare ourselves for Har Sinai. Thank you.
Yes, keep up your great work, Michal.
Amen.
Thank you for listening to that episode. I hope you're well. This is Michal. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button and check out all the podcasts from the Motivation Congregation Podcast Network. Please reach out on WhatsApp. Let's talk. Let's fight about these varts. Let's grow and steig together. And if you would be so kind as to like and even write a review for the podcast, that also helps grow the platform and reach more people. And I guess if you want to be less kind, you can leave a bad review. I guess that works too. Either way, smash the link below, reach out on WhatsApp, and let's be in touch. Have a great day.